I think IBM has invested heavily into a lot of open source technology over the last few years. Namely, a few years ago it was big on Spark, right? So we created a Spark Technology Center so that developers that wanted to understand that technology could leverage that, and then we learned from that. I think they're doing the same thing with blockchain now. We've invested heavily into hyperledger and the Linux Foundation, and so that we can do a few things, right? One is we can be ahead of the technology, right? We can influence somewhat the direction, but also learn what people are wanting to do with this technology so that we can add the additional things onto it that will make their life easier, right? Namely around things like you mentioned, around storage, right? The storage requirements for blockchain are going to be enormous, right? So there's an opportunity there for us to help them with our cloud technology, our cloud storage platform, as well around analytics. IBM has a huge investment in analytics, and that's one area with regards to blockchain that it promises a lot of value. It has this single line of sight of everything that's happened around assets and people involved in the process, and can pull a lot of data together. Not that everything is going to be on the chain, but the single story will be there. And analytics is all about telling a story. And so now you have a single place that you can go to sort of pull that story together. And I think that's an area that IBM is going to benefit from, having people leveraging Hyperledger Fabric and Hyperledger Composer to build their applications. Yep. So that we can learn from what are the patterns that they're building on this, so that we can build the analytics capability to make to extend into that blockchain network. So I've been with IBM about 15 years. I came in through an acquisition where my focus has always been on business partners wanting to leverage analytics technology, right? So whether that's business intelligence or predictive or prescriptive analytics, being able to leverage that in the solutions that they go to market with. Over the last few years, I've focused a little bit more on the artificial intelligence, machine learning, into IoT, and now into blockchain. IBM has started focusing a lot on open source technology. We've always been heavily invested in open source, but over the last few years, things like Spark, and now into Hyperledger and Hyperledger Fabric, Hyperledger Composer, IBM is investing heavily in the open source projects around blockchain. And I think from a leading edge perspective, right, IBM is looking at this as, again, as an opportunity of how do they influence that technology, learn from what people are using that technology for, so that we can take some of the things that we do very well around cloud processing, mainframe processing. So a lot of our blockchain technology actually runs on our mainframe, right? Leveraging the power and the computing resources that are available in the mainframe, as well as storage, so that you can improve the blockchain processing. Then you look at analytics, and like we were talking earlier about, is I have a single line of sight. I have this single view of the entire history of everything that's gone on in this business process in one place. Not all the data is there, but the story is there. I may have to integrate that with other systems, but from an analytics perspective, I have one place that I can start to tell the story from. And I think that's an area that IBM is looking at for.
So to be more specific, what is the biggest changes from hyperledger technology upon the current, blockchain technology or applications right now in the market?
So from a hyperledger perspective, right, this is all very new technology. I mean, this is version 1 still. IBM has contributed a lot to that hyperledger project. In particular, recently, we have contributed what's called Hyperledger Composer. It's making the development of your hyperledger, your business networks, much easier. I'll actually be doing a workshop to get people hands-on today with that product, Hyperledger Composer, so they can actually start to see what does it take to build up the business network, right? From defining what my assets What do my participants look like? What do those transactions in the smart contracts look like? And then what events need to be triggered? So make that as easy as possible. Still, before you actually do the development, right, IBM works with its partners and its customers on design thinking of what do I want to build? And do I have the proper participants in this to make this effective so that I can create change in this business process?
You mentioned that the IBM has been investing in open source for a while. Why? What is the importance?
So a lot of it is this idea of community, right? Because we all learn from each other, right? I've learned a lot today. I've shared some of my knowledge today as well. But this open source mentality is, okay, we're going to all share ideas. We're going to share our knowledge and our domain expertise. And IBM's always been heavily invested back to, we were the ones who contributed Linux to the open source community, right? All the way through to today. Like I said, we're one of the largest contributors to the hyperledger project and have contributed that Composer UI. But I think, again, it's because IBM can use the capabilities that we have, right? We're the largest holders of patents every year. So we have a lot of expertise in the areas of math and science, and we contribute that to the open source, and what we get in return is we understand the usage patterns of that technology, okay? And we can share that again with our customers.
Is it?
One of the big use cases even for blockchain, right, is this international trade finance. Because it's so paper intensive and so much regulation in transferring funds across borders, right? Blockchain holds a promise for making that much easier, much less costly to occur. So, yeah.
So this sharing of new knowledge in this community, or just building up a bigger community to share discovery of new frontiers of the discoveries is becoming increasingly important for the coming decentralized economy.
Most definitely. I mean, there are things that I focus a lot on the North America and Latin America. But I don't know some of the things that are going on in Asia Pacific, in the African worlds and so forth. And we can all learn from each other because there's different usage patterns. And if you end up designing something that is focused on one particular market, you may miss an opportunity.
Do you think actually is crucial or essential for current the big market players of the the high-tech based social media platform, or just any tech firms to join this open source investment, to share the community or build up a bigger community?
Yeah, and you see it with the Hyperledger project. Oracle just recently joined, one of IBM's biggest competitors, right? So we're all seeing the need to contribute to this community. We're all going to benefit from it.
Yeah.
So, and even at a smaller level, we talked about it earlier today, that players in a business network are oftentimes going to be competitors. And the reason that they're willing to do that, we look at Walmart's food safety, right? A lot of our competitors in the supplying of foods and product to Walmart, they're willing to participate because it's for the common good, right? And I think that's sort of a common theme here, is that everybody wants to do things that are...
And also the problem of monopoly that might have been troubling the industry for decades could be a little bit alleviated.
Yeah, you're going to have transparency in what's going on, right? So that's another key aspect of blockchain, is it providing that transparency so that you don't have one person that owns all the data.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, could you also give some sort of enlightenment about the cloud, technology recently researched or developed, through IBM?
Right. So, with regards to blockchain, some of the things that IBM is doing in its cloud, security, is very important when we're talking about private blockchain.
Yeah.
Not public blockchain, but private blockchain. You're only going to invite those people in that you want. IBM's cloud is considered one of the most secure clouds out there, right, from a public cloud perspective. So when you're building your applications and deploying them, you're letting in the people only that you want into your network, right? Also from a compute power perspective, right, we have some of the leading platforms for processing power, right? Both power systems as well as our mainframe capabilities, okay? And then cloud storage, right? So we have some of the leading capabilities around whether it's object storage or database storage or whatever, right? Of lending that to things like blockchain. So
yeah. So is IBM facing competition or challenges from other companies doing a very probably similar, I guess, research or development?
Yeah, and so you see, you of course see companies like Microsoft and AWS and Google and to some degree Oracle as well is now really making a play onto cloud, but IBM differentiates itself. Again, we focus on businesses, right? You'll see companies like AWS and Google who really focus on consumer type applications, right? And to some degree even Microsoft, right? IBM has always been focused on enterprise and businesses, right? How do I take this technology, build products and solutions that I'll sell to my customers?
So do you see actually the business is welcoming this decentralized cloud storage system in the coming years?
So again, you have to look at the difference between public and private blockchain, right? So even with the private blockchain, while it's somewhat decentralized, it's still housed within whoever is owning this business network, right? It's not like public blockchain where anybody that wants to get on can get on, right? So I'm still somewhat centralizing that computing power and so forth.
Or probably establish some sort of a mechanism of like a mutual.
So only the people that I'm inviting in will have that processing power, but it's still going to be housed all within IBM Cloud or wherever they're choosing to host that private blockchain. Okay, so but just from a cloud perspective, right? We are seeing more and more companies every day willing to go to the public cloud. There was a few years ago, people were afraid, saying, "Oh, it's not as secure as being within my four walls." The more I talk to my partners and customers, they're like, "IBM's data centers are probably far more secure than mine are." So even though it is public blockchain, it's only the people that I'm allowing in. So I think people are more willing to move work streams and workloads to the cloud. Even in a public cloud setting, because the security, we spend far more money on security and making sure that that environment is secure than they would ever think of.
So are you also focusing more on the how to incorporate the advantage of the hardware from IBM, to put this advantage into the basic research and development, for example, like blockchain and data analytics?
Yeah, if you think about it, I mean, if I'm, we call them three guys in a garage. If I'm a small company that's just starting out and I am building a blockchain network for my customers and my business partners and so forth, right? There would have been no way a few years ago for me to be able to leverage the computing power of the mainframe. I just couldn't afford it. Through our blockchain services, right, I'm actually benefiting from that technology. I'm going to get those computing resources available to me when I deploy my network to the IBM blockchain.
Yeah. So could you give us more like details about what the workshop is going to do this afternoon here for this event?
Yeah. So JP Riley earlier was talking about how 80% of the time of building a blockchain is around understanding the business process. And the 20% is around the implementation. Okay? So I'm going to actually show you today, how do you implement this, right? How do you take the knowledge that you have around a business process and make that come to life? How do I define what are the participants that are going to be involved in my network, right? Who's going to be exchanging assets, which is the next part. What are those assets that we're going to interchange? And whether that's a cryptocurrency or a physical asset or an intangible asset. how do I define what that thing looks like? Okay, and then build the smart contract. How do I put this logic in that says, when I want to transact between participants, what has to occur, and what does the state of the asset and what does the state of the participant have to be in order for this transaction to occur? And then how do I define who gets notified when this transaction occurs? How do I define events? And it breaks down to those 4 basic parts. Right? So I'm going to take some of the mystery out of how do you build a blockchain network. And within an hour, you will have actually built a blockchain network. Right? My sole focus is on how do I build applications and products and services on top of this technology. And blockchain, honestly, should always be around a business process. And you're always going to have multiple participants. If you don't have multiple participants, you don't have a blockchain network.
Are you studying, looking for another different incentive mechanism other than tokens for business?
So we look at just we look at things between participants and assets, right? So what those assets are, we don't really care. So it could be a token that is the asset that's exchanged. It could be a house. It could be a car. It could be a digital asset, recording, right? A movie. It could be anything. We don't, the blockchain technology doesn't really care. It just says it's an asset, okay? And then you, as you're building your application, you define what that asset is. Okay?
So how does your research differentiate from educational lab, set up probably in one of the best universities in the U.S. So the biggest difference is from the business application or what?
So I would say the biggest difference, that, again, not being from someone like Purdue University or something, but coming from my background, I work in probably 100 different industries every week. I'm talking to different partners all the time that are in, whether they're in the financial services or the healthcare or the cannabis industry or auto manufacturing, supply chain, you name it. I see a lot of different use cases. And I honestly get people that bring use cases to me that I have to say, that's really not a case for blockchain, right? But I'm seeing a lot of idea generation by people who are actually building the applications. And that's where I think the difference between what I see and what you would see in academia is, although academia does work tightly with industry and even with IBM, but a lot of times you maybe not see actually boots on the ground of what's happening. And I think I get exposure to a lot of that.
So, what do you think the kind of advice from some experts in this industry saying that it's getting crucially important for the blockchain industry to form a sort of a self-governance and a regulatory framework in order to better cultivate a much healthier crypto market even in the coming years?
So I'll avoid any conversations around cryptocurrency because it's not my focus. But what I will say is you still see it today that there are different blockchain projects, right? I mean, Hyperledger, I think, has 4 or 5 different projects. And each of those projects may have a different focus. Hyperledger Fabric, for example, is focused on blockchain for business. Now, what you will see is the application of that technology. You will see certain areas, whether it's supply chain, food safety, and so forth. You're going to have large players that are going to build regulatory bodies around a business process, like food safety, for example, right? Where you want some commonality there. But whether you build that on a Hyperledger Fabric or whether you build that on an Ethereum, they're basically doing the same thing. We believe that Hyperledger Fabric is truly designed more so than any of the other platforms for that blockchain for business, and that's why IBM is partnered with that technology.
Yeah. So what do you think the American public policy field should do more about their work, or what kind of work they should do to cultivate probably a better environment, to facilitate the whole industry going upon a better track?
Yeah. I think first of all, there needs to be some more education. It's still a new technology, right? Around what is blockchain and what blockchain isn't.
Exactly.
And I actually do some presentations on trying to differentiate, okay, what's a good use case for blockchain, what isn't. But then even within blockchain, right, a lot of the needs for having blockchain are, I have to show transparency. I have to be able to provide the information. And I think that's where some of the analytics is going to come in, that you're going to need more insight into what's going on in these business processes. And the data's there. It's sometimes difficult to get that information out. And I think there's going to be a lot of work over the next few years to make that easier, so that when these industries and these organizations want to adopt the blockchain technology, they can provide the information that they're being asked, whether that's by a government agency or a regulatory body or something, that they can provide that information more quickly and more seamlessly. So, okay.